To get started here, we'll call our meeting of the April 6th Wildlife and Fishery Commission meeting to order. And I'll ask Mr. Joe to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Miss Susan, roll call, please. Here.
Greer is absent. Andy Brister. Here. Joe McPherson. Here. Gene Reynolds. Here. Kevin Segura. Here. Allison Sari. Here. Mr. Chairman, there are 6 commissioners in attendance, and we have a quorum. Secretary Montese is also present.
Right, thank you. Next, we need adoption of the March 2nd, 2023 Commission meeting minutes. Got a motion by Mr. Joe and second by Kevin. All in favor of the adoption, state aye. Any opposition? No opposition. Motion passes. We need approval for the April 6th, 2023 agenda. Yes, I need a motion on that.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we got a motion on the floor, second by Gene Reynolds. All in favor, state aye. Motion passes. Next, we have commission special announcements, personal privileges. Anyone has something to say? I'll just be brief. We had a American Shrimp Processors meeting in Biloxi, Mississippi this year, and we had full staff from the department there. And I just want to thank Patrick and his crew for showing up, and it was very informative on what was done. And I'm sure everyone that was in full attendance at that meeting appreciated what y'all, provided to the industry right there. Thank y'all.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, and she's going to kill me when this is over. But my wife came down with me today. She's from Metairie. I talked to somebody from Metairie and moving to Lake Providence, and she's in the pink coat right here. And her name is Laurie Brister, and I just wanted to introduce her to everybody.
Thank you there. Nice to meet you there, Laurie. All right. Well, moving on, we'll go to enforcement report by Major Edward Skinner.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. For the month of March, we had 44 boating incidents, 3 injuries and no fatalities, 579 written citations, 514 written warnings, and 10 public assists. And I have a few cases that we're going to highlight for you that took place last month. Enforcement agents cited 2 men in LaSalle Parish, one for hunting turkey during the closed season, and the other subject was cited for criminal conspiracy. Agents were on patrol when they observed the subject hunting and then heard a single gunshot coming from the subject's hunting area. During the investigation, agents made contact with another subject they suspected was assisting the hunter illegally. The hunter was contacted by phone and he admitted to harvesting a turkey. Agents seized the turkey and donated it to a local charity. The hunter faces civil restitution totaling $1,539 for the replacement value of the illegally taken turkey. 2 subjects were cited in Terrebonne Parish for using skimmers during a closed season and using oversized skimmer nets. Agents were on patrol in state offshore waters south of Terrebonne Parish near Oyster Bayou when they observed a skimmer vessel actively shrimping in closed waters. When the agents boarded the vessel, they found the subjects in possession of 1,453 pounds of shrimp and the oversized nets. Agents seized the shrimp and sold them to the highest bidder. The illegal nets were also seized. Enforcement agents cited 4 subjects in 2 different cases for multiple deer hunting violations in LaSalle and Catahoula parishes. Alan Dayton of Jenna, Will Dayton of Gina, John Cruz of Ola, and Carmen Cruz of Ola were each cited for taking over the seasonal limit of deer. John Cruz was also cited for taking over the daily limit of deer and failing to tag deer. Carmen Cruz was also cited for failure to tag deer. After receiving information about the Daytons and the Cruzes harvesting deer over the seasonal limit, agents began their investigation. They made contact with the subjects and they all admitted to harvesting over the seasonal limit of deer for the 22-23 deer season. Additionally, the agents learned that Alan Dayton harvested 10 deer during the season. Will Dayton harvested 12 deer. John Cruz harvested 4 antlered deer, with 2 being on the same day. And Carmen Cruz harvested 4 antlered deer. Civil restitution for the Daytons total $16,246, and civil restitution for Cruz is $4,874 for the replacement value of all of those deer that were taken over the limit. This concludes the report, sir.
Major Skinner, you're making the presentation. I'm using it as an opportunity to bring something up. We had looked at the civil restitution fines in the past, and if we could get an update on that, I would appreciate it. And the other thing that I'd like to ask a question on, do we track how many of our cases go to court as opposed to being null prost, or will we know how much civil restitution we're using as a result of that?
So the civil restitution, we're keeping track of that. We actually have a couple of guys that are working in that program. And so that I can tell you, if you wanted to know how much we collected on any given time or what months, that information would be available. The criminal cases, as far as what is being prosecuted and what is not, we do not have a master list of that.
What I understood was that when a case is not prosecuted criminally, then the civil restitution also goes out the window. Is that correct?
No, sir, that is not correct.
If I could weigh in, keep in mind that we decoupled the collection of civil restitution from the criminal prosecution. We keep the civil restitution in-house, run that through the Division of Administrative Law. The only time that we do not seek civil restitution is if the criminal matter, the person is found not guilty in open court. So a null pros would not result, criminal null pros would not result in us not seeking the civil restitution. They would have to be acquitted in open court in the criminal matter.
Well, that was a captain that told me that gave me that answer. So evidently it hadn't gone all the way down through the rank and file yet. But that's good to hear.
Yeah, we've been doing that since the inception of our civil restitution, taking it in-house.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? No, thank you there, Major Scanner. All right, next we have received public comments on the notice of intent for rules changes in the wild quadrupeds and wild bird rules and regulations, including general WMA hunting rules and regulations, in general WMA turkey hunting regulations, resident game hunting season date adjustments for the 2023, 2024, 2024, and 2025 migratory bird season adjustments for 2023 and 2024. So Tommy, you go ahead and just tell us all about it.
I'm gonna try to make it shorter than your announcement of my
And
title.
what I just done, thank you.
All right. Good morning. Happy Easter to everyone. I'm here today to present what you just said. I didn't take the opportunity to memorize it because I have a little pea-sized brain, but I did not receive any comment from the conditionally approved notice of intent. So for the period since the last commission meeting, we did not receive any. However, what I will go over is the summary of public comment that I received for the conditionally approved potpourri amendments to the hunting season notice of intent. And to remind everybody what those amendments were, we made a amendment, last month you voted to include a conditionally approved and what they're called as potpourri amendments to the notice of intent. And this was the amendment that we brought forward to you, where deer tags can only be used by the person that the tags were issued to. So nobody has commented on that since we have made that proposal. Subsequently, also with the deer, we did the same thing with the turkey tag. So if you, only the person that's issued the tag can utilize that tag. Last month, we did an amendment for the West Zone waterfowl dates. We did not change the youth and veterans only weekend. It stayed November 4th and 5th. However, those are the amended dates that you did approve last month. And since you changed the waterfowl season, it also changed, I told you that it would change the light geese season also, since it runs concurrent with the West Zone, although it's a 74 days instead of 60. So it's a little different on the back end, but the first two splits are the same. I did not go over it. I did not include it. When you change that, it also changed the conservation order in the West Zone also. So what you did was you changed the West Zone waterfowl dates for ducks, and then you changed the light geese season, and you changed the conservation order. So just be cognizant of that. So during that time, we received 58 comments related to those potpourri amendments. And that came from 38 different individuals. And here's what the comments said. We've received 38 comments on the West Zone waterfowl season. 31 were opposed to the amendment. They requested specifically to go back to the original proposed dates. 7 people supported the amended dates that we voted in. 20 folks wanted to separate the youth and veterans weekends. They requested to have a youth weekend first and then a veterans weekend after the normal season framework. So they're wanting to separate those dates and have a youth weekend in the front and then a veterans hunt in the end. And with that, I will let you know that a public hearing on the proposed substantive changes. So a public hearing on these potpourri amendments will be held in this room on April the 20th at 10 a.m. So if anybody wants to attend that meeting, we'll go over what these potpourri amendments were and take public comment at that time. And so after that, I will entertain any question that you have.
Right. Yes, any questions on it? The only comments that I've had is about the proposed duck hunting changes that we done that went at the amendment. And from what I've understood with folks that contacted me, some of them want it to stay like it is, and some of them want it to change to original dates.
Right.
Right there.
Yes, sir.
And it's all to do with the dates of kids being out of school, and the biggest one, they want a different, like you said, the youth day different than the veterans.
That's
Day.
right.
So I guess we get to vote on that next month.
Yeah, we would wait till after the public hearing, and I think next month you would vote whether to include the amendments into the notice of intent, correct me if I'm wrong. And then after that, you would take a final vote on the notice of intent, the hunting season notice of intent.
And let me ask, if we change it, it goes on to the following month? If we change the dates back to where originally was.
Then you just vote not to include the West Waterfall Zone amendment into the notice of intent. You would vote separately whether to include the turkey tags, the deer tags, and then you could vote in the West Waterfall. So you could vote to include the turkey tags, which I would recommend, and then y'all can do whatever y'all want to do with the West Zone dates. You would just either vote to include it in the notice of intent, or you would vote to not include the amended dates into the notice of intent. If you voted not to, then it would just go back to the original proposal.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yes,
Kevin?
I have a question. The way the zones are split, so we're just 2 zones now, and at one point we were 3 zones. That goes on a 5-year rotation, or do you know the answer to that?
That's correct.
So, and
This will be year
this
3.
coming season will
This-
be year 3 or
Yes,
year
sir.
4?
I think it's year 3. It's year 3.
Year 3?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Because it's just something that, and so you can't change it until the 5th year, but that's something to look at for sure. If you've got problems in that west zone, that there's conflicting on different sides of the state. So that was just my question.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
So just follow up, I will be accepting public comments for the notice of intent until May the 3rd, which will be the day before the next Wildlife and Fisheries Committee meeting. We will also have that administrative public hearing, so I will be providing, if I get a bunch, then I'll provide that to you throughout the month as I have been in the past. So y'all have received every bit of information I've received. You also saw that Ms. Susan sent you some things Tuesday. I've received 8 emails since then, and that was all the 8 emails that were in support of that West Zone amended change, okay? That's all I have.
All righty.
Thank you.
Thanks there, Tommy. All right, moving on. to Item 9, receive and consider a notice of intent to amend the Deer Management Assistant Program. And Jonathan Bordelon is going to give us that.
Good morning, Chairman Blanchard, members of the commission, Jonathan Bordlawn, Deer Program Manager, Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. Today, proposing a notice of intent to amend the DMAP eligibility requirements for program participants within 5 miles of a CWD detection. Just a little background of where we've been and kind of where we're heading with this amendment. So even before the detection of CWD, we've been preparing for it. And, you know, with that, we had a CWD response plan, which mirrored the Association of Fish and Wildlife Service Agencies best management practices pretty closely. So when you look at those, there's some common themes in both the plan and in the AFWA best management practices. Obviously, when you're starting out and you have a threat such as CWD, the early focus was on prevention. So we're trying to prevent the introduction and establishment of this particular disease. And the way we did that is obviously one quick way to move disease around is to move live animals with disease to new areas. So early on, one of the first things that was established was a prohibition on the movement of live animals. That was later followed by the cervid carcass importation. So we know with this disease that certain high-risk parts can harbor high loads of that disease. And if they find their way to our state and make their way into the environment, that can become a source of new infection. And with a growing number of states in the last 20 years, per se, that was the justification behind pursuing that. So we kept working our way down. We eventually got to another benchmark, which was products. In this case, it was deer urine. That was an obvious way that CWD could be introduced and transmitted. So we checked that box too with both our plan and those guiding documents. And then unnatural concentrations of deer. So we addressed that through baiting. Obviously, we didn't have anything in place in advance of the detection, but certainly we have established baiting prohibitions since. And that gives us some history of what we've done. You know, those were some of the obvious things to do in an effort to hopefully slow or prevent introduction of the disease. But then we fast forward not only to surveillance, you know, which is an important part. You need to be looking for the disease in your state, but also monitoring it where CWD has been found. And unfortunately, as we all know, it was found in January of 2022 here in Louisiana, in Tensall Parish. And that kind of kicked off a new phase of things. So, you know, we've been focused on prevention, and now we're having to manage a disease that's here on our landscape. So how do we do that? Few tools out there, and we've already utilized some of them, but we have another tool or two that we have not yet gotten to, and that's what we're going to look at today. So this is just part of surveillance. Obviously, we're looking all over the state. We've been looking since 2002, and we continue to look today, primarily relying on hunter-harvested samples, but also responding to sick and neurologic deer, because those are obviously animals that we want to get tested. Looking closer at where CWD is found, and the circles here aren't that important, but the one in the middle, the red circle, is a 5 mile. And I want you to remember that because it's going to have relevance in this presentation. It's just meant to provide some scale. But looking, we've obviously followed our plan in conducting statewide surveillance. So we're still looking for the disease out there in other places where it hasn't been detected. That hasn't changed. That's been in place since 2002. But we really focused our effort here in our control area that was established last year. Reason is we're trying to get our handle on exactly how prevalent is the disease and how widespread is it from that original positive. And based on what we've been able to attain up to this point, we can say that the disease is definitely there, certainly within close proximity of that positive. So all additional positives that were detected this past season were all within 5 miles of that index case from 2022. So the red circle there is basically just a 5-mile radius from that index case. So fast forwarding, what are some of the things that we're proposing? Obviously, we've already restricted the movement of high-risk parts. We've eliminated certain practices such as baiting and feeding. All those were aimed at preventing further spread of the disease. Again, those were mitigations that are not only in our plan, but part of the AFWA best management practices. But now we're heading into a new arena, and that has to do with population management, at least population management in close proximity of where that disease has been found. So part of that is targeting animals in known CWD locations. And what do we mean by targeting animals? In this case, we're talking about population management. We're talking about keeping herd numbers well below carrying capacity. Obviously, the fewer animals, the less likely they are to come in contact with another positive animal. So how do we do that? Well, in Louisiana and many states, you do that through bag limits and season lengths. So obviously, those are two different things that you can work with, either independently or simultaneously. And our proposal today will cover how we're going to actually use both of them. So managing CWD in Louisiana, what we're proposing is actually to utilize something that's already in place. We have the Deer Management Assistance Program, DMAP. DMAP has certain eligibility requirements. So not just everyone can be in DMAP. There are certain requirements that you must meet. It's a voluntary program, so you're not required to be in it. We have more than 700 cooperators today on almost 1.5 million acres. So it is a popular program. It's widespread. It's found throughout the state. And it's even found in great abundance in Northeast Louisiana. Tensas is one of the highest DMAP participation parishes as far as acres or available acres that are actually enrolled in that program. So what is DMAP? Well, it has different tiers, and I won't belabor those, but we have one tier in DMAP that provides both antlered and antlerless tags. So what does that do? Well, that basically allows us to prescribe a harvest, meaning we're able to actually issue tags, program tags that are plastic tags that are placed on the animals. So we provide those to the participating property. What's the significance of that? Well, what it allows them to do, they can actually exceed the daily and season bag limits. So when you're in tier 1, you're no longer reliant on on your license tags that are issued to you. You're using these program tags that afford you certain privileges. In addition to those privileges in the form of expanded take due to the liberalized limit, it also gives them a 15-day season extension. So you have more days to hunt. You can harvest more deer, again, on a property where it is voluntarily enrolled. But what do we get from it? So we're going to get some biological data. That's very important, obviously, when you're monitoring for herd health and you're looking at disease, but you're also able to capture certain habitat indices. So you're able to look at the relationship between deer and their environment. That's also very important when you're managing disease. And DMAP already has its own data management system. Any biologist in the state has access to it. It's server-based. So if a biologist in Monroe enters data, it's in that system in real time. Every biologist with access to that system, including me or any other person with access, could look at it in real time. We can query the data. We can run various reports. So it's a good way of record keeping. And I'll go back to it in a second because we're going to look at some alternatives used by other states. So what are some alternatives to this? Instead of utilizing a tool we already have to achieve what our objective is, what are some alternatives? We look at our states like Mississippi, for instance. They issue a special use permit. It's basically aimed at doing the same thing. Their special use permit has special tags. In addition to those special tags, it also gives them additional days to hunt. And that would work, and there's no issue or problem with that. The only challenge there is we already have an existing data management system. So rather than creating a new method of tracking things, a new way of sorting data, generating reports, we're trying to use what we already have. So obviously that would be the preferred route for that reason alone, because both can achieve the same thing, but the benefit of using Tier 1 DMAP allows you to use the system in place, the tags we already have, run the reports that have already been created. So that's kind of the plus there. And the other is sharpshooting. It is not popular at all. It is something very contentious in the states that it's practiced, but it is practiced in a few states. And what does sharpshooting mean in this case? Sharpshooting refers to the agency going out within close proximity of known CWD positives, usually within a mile to 3 miles of a positive, depending on the state. And they're literally trying to harvest as many deer as possible to reduce that population in closest proximity to a positive. Obviously, what we're trying to do here is allow hunters hunting on the properties they have access to harvest the deer recreationally, and at a rate and number that not only they are comfortable with, but something that we're engaged in working with them on. So how do we go about doing this? We have rules now for DMAP, and I did not put the entire regulation in there. I just included some of a portion at which there would be amendments, and those amendments are underlined. I'll just briefly go through those. So right now with Tier 1, what we're going to allow is an exception for lands within 5 miles of chronic wasting disease. They may enroll at any time of the season. So why is that? Well, in the event that chronic wasting disease is found outside of the enrollment window, a club or a property won't have to wait a whole year before taking management action or responding to the disease. They'll be able to do it in real time. However, the regulation now stipulates you must enroll during this specific time. So the amendment in this case would allow flexibility only for properties within 5 miles of a detection. The other thing is you must have 1,000 acres in order to enroll in DMAP Tier 1 at this time. We're actually looking to reduce this to the 40-acre minimum for DMAP. So in DMAP, rather if they were enrolling in Tier 3 per se, there's a 40-acre minimum. We're going to allow that to apply to properties within 5 miles. So it's kind of the common theme. Again, where is this being allowed? It's again focused where the disease has been detected. So the amendments are going to change the time frame at which you can enroll. They're also going to reduce the acreage. The level 1 participation may require the submission of CWD samples, but without a doubt, they will have to collect biological data, and there'll be no fee. And I'll go through each of those, just a short justification of why. So why 5 miles? 5 miles in this case, if you go back to our plan and you go back to how USDA defines these disease zones, we talk about 5 miles as an infectious zone. What does that mean? That is an area where we have established that the disease is present. So everything within 5 miles of that positive is already classified in our plan as the infectious zone. Thus, we're applying these mitigation measures within the infectious zone in closest proximity to where the disease has been detected. What does that look like on the landscape? Just thinking about it from an acre standpoint, it's kind of sometimes hard to think 5 mile radius, but you're looking at roughly 50,000 acres. So that's what we're talking about there. And obviously, with more positives, that acreage grows around each of those positives. Why no fee? These hunters have already faced some added restrictions. We certainly want their cooperation. The application of mitigation measures is key to the response in this disease. So we need to work with the hunters and landowners in achieving disease management. And so the goal there is to foster communication, cooperation, and one way to do that through this voluntary program is to offer it at no fee. Again, what are they doing for us? We're not going out there and sharpshooting. We're not intervening. They're doing that through guidance provided, and they're also collecting key data and samples in an area where we are of great concern. So we justify what they're giving us in this true cooperative relationship as value to offset that what would normally be a fee of a few $100s. Why voluntary versus mandatory sampling? You may have noticed that it would seem as if we'd want to sample every deer within that 5 miles of a positive. Again, we know the disease is there. At that point, we're not trying to detect the disease. The disease has been found and it's present. You don't need 100% of the samples to monitor or track prevalence in that case. You can get it with a smaller number. In addition, if you look at our neighbors to the east in Mississippi, they're at 10 positive counties now. And I talked to William McKinley, my counterpart there, and they have a similar program, again, through the special use permit. And I asked William, how many properties are eligible? He says, I have no idea because of the parcels. We don't know. We know how many acres would be eligible, but there's thousands. So you can see if you had mandatory testing for thousands of properties, that could become a huge issue, not just from a cost standpoint, but just the logistics of testing them and getting results turned around. So that would be a challenge in itself. So while we may have to test them all, we put in there may and not that we would require it. So just wanted to provide some backstory as to why it's voluntary and not mandatory. I will say this, early on, our experience with CWD, you look at the property at which it's detected. Since it's been detected, they've tested every deer they've harvested. So it's not necessarily something you're going to have to twist folks' arms to do. It's something we're already getting a great number of. It's just by putting it in regulation that it is required, then they would be in violation of the law in the event they would not have a deer tested. We just don't see the need for that at this time. One other thing that is not specific, but it is related in a way, it's to amend in the regulation right now. You have to return all of your data and unused tags by March 1st. We're actually looking to amend to change that to 30 days after the close of season. And that's just to allow a consistency for every participating member of DMAP, depending on where you are in the state, or if you enroll in Tier 1 and those 15 days are added to the end of your season, it gives them the same amount of time to gather up their records and submit it as everyone else. So there again, we're just moving away from a hard date and just going to a number of days. So very, very simple change. Again, just looking to provide a consistent window for submission of data for everyone, regardless of their level of participation. So closing remarks, Tier 1 in this case is going to provide an avenue for season and bag limit liberalization for hunters within close proximity of CWD detections, while collecting much needed biological and disease surveillance samples. And any questions or public comment could be sent to me. I have both my email and phone number up there. We will have a subsequent news release that'll go out, that'll alert the public of this change, if so approved by the commission, of course. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, any questions for Jonathan? Great presentation there, Jonathan. So, on the notice of intent, Cole, we need to vote on that?
Correct.
All right. I guess I need a motion by, got a motion by Mr. Joe on the notice of intent, second by Gene Reynolds. All in favor of the notice of intent, state aye. Any opposition? No opposition, your notice of intent passes. Okay, great job, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chairman Blanchard. Thank you, members of the commission.
All right, next we'll receive we gotta receive and consider a notice of intent amending the trapping and handling regulations if a fox, coyote, Miss Melissa Collins is going to give us that presentation.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting everyone, so allow me to introduce myself. I'm Melissa Collins. I'm a wildlife biologist for the department, obviously. And I manage the captive wildlife and nuisance wildlife programs. And I'm here with my colleague, Jennifer Hogue Manuel. She's our fur bearer biologist, and she oversees the trapping program. So this notice of intent is a request to amend the coyote fox pen or preserve regulations, along with the sale, purchase of coyotes and foxes, and the year-round permitting, or excuse me, the year-round trapping of coyotes. All right, so what exactly is a coyote fox pen? So these are fenced properties. Typically, the ones that we have that we regulate, they're typically 10 acres to up to about 1,000 acres. So the animals, the game, the coyote and foxes are contained within these fenced areas. So just to give you an idea of what they look like, they're wooded areas. with probably about 4 or 5 foot high, 4x2 welded wire. You usually have about 2 or 3 strands of hot wire at the top and 1 strand at the bottom, right? So this helps keep the game in the pen. So the gentlemen that have these licenses, they use their Walker hounds or their beagles to chase the game, the coyotes or foxes within the pen. So what is the purpose of this NOI? So we're going to adjust or amend definitions, permitting, licenses, the responsibilities of licensees, trap sizes, disease prevention, and the humane treatment of the game in the pens. So let's talk a little bit about the definitions. We're updating, or we were requesting an amendment to the definition of licensee. So we're including bona fide. And I can read bona fide to you, but basically it says that any individual who's resided in Louisiana 12 months prior to applying for this particular license would be eligible. We would like to remove non-resident, and that's because coyotes and foxes are not allowed to be imported or exported into or out of the state. So non-residents do not qualify for this particular license. Okay, so let's look at the license permits and fees. So sections 1, 2, and 3. So as you see here, we're reinserting this verbiage. And I should tell you that, there was an oversight when we looked at all of the department's regs and updated them to fit with the new licensing fee restructure. So what should have happened is on C1, 2, and 3, the actual explicit cost of these licenses, so the non-game quadruped breeder, exhibitor, and CT coyote trapping licenses, those actual costs should have been deleted and not the verbiage. So we're reinserting that verbiage, and basically it says that the department can issue or grant a license to an individual to trap coyotes on the outside of the trapping season, so from April 1st until November 19th. It also allows us to issue non-game quadruped breeders licenses to individuals who wish to sell coyotes or foxes. Those individuals are also required to have a valid trapping license. All right, so number 2 just says exactly what I just told you, that you need the breeder's license to be able to sell these animals and the exhibitor's license to possess these animals in a pen. And as I mentioned, this is just a reinsertion of what was already in the regulations prior to the publication of the register on March 20th. All right, so let's talk about the amendments to the general rules. So what we would like to do is remove the hunting preserve owners as being the individual who's supposed to take care of the animals, provide food and water. We want to change that to the licensee. So the reason that we want to do that is because the pen lessee or the pen owner or landowner is not always the actual licensee. So to give you an example, I have one pen. The owner of the property lives in Texas, has nothing to do with the pen. And so the individual who receives the license we believe should be held accountable or responsible for the activities that go on in the pen, as well as taking care of the game in the pen. All right, a few more amendments to the general rules. So you'll see here that what we've done is, instead of requiring individuals who trap coyotes on the off season they previously were limited to one type of trap. We're expanding it so that the trap size and the types fit not only with or mirrors the BMPs for AFWA, but also it gives these guys a little, they need other options. And particularly the one that was allowed was not necessarily the best option. So again, we would like to change this to mirror the AFWA BMPs. And so if you're not familiar with AFWA, it's the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. And within that, there's a fur bearer management group who came up with these best management practices. So they evaluated over 600 types of traps for about 23 species. So they were looking at things like, is it humane? Is it safe? Is it efficient? And so we believe that expanding it to use these size and types in the BMPs is a better option for the gentlemen who trap coyotes on the off season. I would also like to mention that, some of my trappers have called me and requested this over the years. And so has the Louisiana Trappers, and Alligator Hunting Association. I think you will find in your packet or somewhere in front of you, there is a letter of support from the Louisiana Trappers and Alligator Hunters Association. All right, so just to kind of give you an example of, well, what does that look like? What do the BMPs look like for eastern coyotes? So I just pulled this table out of there. I'm not going to read it to you, but you see that now there's a various sizes and types of coyote traps available to trappers. Okay, so more amendments to the general rules. So we're making 3 adjustments. We would like to require individuals or licensees. You'll see that we're changing that again from owners to licensees to euthanize any sick or neurologic animal. We do not want these animals to be moved or sold, and this is to prevent the spread of diseases. Also, any animals held under a non-game quadruped breeder or pen permit shall not physically alter these animals except for treatments or surgeries by a Louisiana licensed veterinarian. So again, let me point out again that we are requesting the change of owners to licensees. And for that, the reason for that is some of these landowners or lessees are not affiliated with the pens or the activities. So we don't feel that that's appropriate to hold them accountable. So with these particular pens and with wildlife in general, the game will inherently escape. They will dig out, as this coyote is doing here. Trees fall on the fences, hurricanes knock over the fences. And so because these animals will escape, and because some of these dogs that are in these pens when they're running field trials or training their puppies, they may come into direct contact, and they certainly are using the same areas and sharing some of the feeding stations. All right, to kind of follow up with that. So, I mentioned that we don't want people to mutilate these animals or perform surgeries or remove parts. So when I visited some of these pens, I've either seen it for myself or I've had my licensees tell me that they're removing part of the tails, and I've seen it. I've seen coyotes without tails. I've seen neutered coyotes. And so some of the things that they tell me is that, it aids in identifying the coyotes that belong to them, that are supposed to be in this pen. Some people have told me that the tails are removed because it makes the animals cold. And some have explained that removing the tails reduces the odds that the dogs are caught. That the game is caught by the dogs. So we want these animals to be held humanely, and the only individuals that should be treating or performing any kind of surgery on any animal should be a licensed vet. And I purposely put this photograph in here. We've all seen dogs sleep. This gray fox, same thing. So the tail serves multiple purposes. It does keep the animal's feet, belly, face warm, serves as a rudder. These guys in particular climb, so it helps them balance as well. All right, and finally, so we need to update the penalty section so that it refers back to C1, 2, and 3 that I mentioned earlier, respectively. So if you recall, I said that because of the changes with our license fees, there was an oversight, and the verbiage from C1, 2, and 3 was mistakenly removed, when in fact, we should have just removed the cost of the licenses. So we need to make certain that our violation section mirrors that of the section C1 through 3. I do have an amendment that sort of came up last night, if I may. I've discussed this with Cole and Miss Susan. You guys don't have this in front of you, but something that one of our majors picked up on. So in the definition for this particular set of regs, all right, so an LWF applicant, it reads currently, is a person who has had no major wildlife or fish violations during the past 3 years who has a minimum of 2 years of trapping experience and who is at least 15 years old. So it was brought to my attention that there is no definition of major violations. So enforcement has asked me to make a request to amend this definition to, it should read, a person who has had no class 3 or greater wildlife or fish violations. So if I may request that amendment verbally, I would like to. If you guys have any questions, that's it for me.
Any questions? Johnny? Yeah. Joe?
You want to adopt the amendment first
Yeah.
to have it in that posture to discuss?
Yes, yes, we got a motion by Joe to adopt the amendment to add,
Last one.
the last,
The definition of
the
LDWF
definition of
approved
it, you know,
applicant.
to the, NOI. And we got second by Sal, all in favor of the amendment, state aye. Any opposition? No opposition, amendment passes.
Thank you.
All right, now Joe's got a question for you.
Melissa, I'm easily confused, but go back to your slide that had the first general rules on about pen owners. Go back forward again.
Did I pass it up?
Pay, slide 10.
Slide 10, okay.
Thank you for numbering these.
Courtesy of Miss
Jason never
Susan.
does.
Miss Susan did that. Okay, slide 10. So what exactly is your question?
What we have reads differently than your
Yes.
presentation.
Right, so I added may or may not be the licensee. So was my understanding that I could make a change such as that. So we changed it to may or may not be, because, so like I said, the licensees are not necessarily the pen owner or the lessee. And so some of these gentlemen actually have handshake deals. There's no contract. I mean, they actively tell me.
So why is the prohibition and may not be involved in pen activities? Well, if you may be the licensee, then shouldn't that be may or may not be involved in pen activity?
Right, so I just want to, so something came up yesterday when I was going over this. So I just want to make it clear that these were my justifications for the changes, for the amendments. This is not,
I'm not looking at the language in the actual.
okay, I just want to make sure that we're all clear about that. So I don't know if I'm explaining myself properly or not, but perhaps I don't have it written up there properly. But while we want you guys to recognize that the licensee could be someone who is not the landowner or the lessee. So, and this happens a lot. And so we want the licensee to be responsible for the activities and the animals that are within the pen.
I don't see why you wouldn't just make it clear that the licensees then and take out all the language about the owners, landowners.
So I think this is just describing it.
Mr. Chairman, Randy Myers,
Go ahead.
so this is just the reasons for or reasons why. It's not, that's not how it's written. It is written licensee in the regulation. So what Melissa is trying to do is to give that explanation. What occurs sometimes in the field is that when you go inspect a pen, you're not necessarily dealing with that landowner. So if that landowner has leased that property to someone else, they may or may not be the landowner. They may not be the ones that's actually getting the license. It's someone else that's applied for that license. Just like someone that has a DMAP club, right? The president of that club may not own that property. And so
understand,
we're
but
holding
here-
that licensee to that standard.
What does the rule say? Does it say anything about landowner may or may not be the licensee?
So landowner, here, I'll read it.
While Melissa's looking for that, I would draw your attention in the NOI, under the definition, under general rules, D5. Previously, the language said the owners of fox/coyote hunting preserves. That language has been marked through and replaced by the word licensees.
Licensee.
So I,
Okay, so that answers my question. So
Yeah.
landowner has nothing to do with it. It's just taking out that the landowner is responsible. Now it's making the licensee responsible.
Correct.
So who owns the land has nothing to do with it. It's who is the licensee for the PNE.
Correct.
Okay, this was confusing, especially with the language. change.
I understand.
And yesterday when we were going through the presentation, that was something we noticed. So we put the word may not, so it's a little bit different than what is in your presentation, just so that we can distinguish, because they may or may not be the licensee, the landowner.
Mr. Chairman, just one question. Thank you, Melissa, for the explanation and the presentation.
You're welcome.
When was the language that was taken out? When did that happen? Because I don't remember during my time on the commission that we had taken any of that language out.
Are you referring to C 1 through 3?
Yes.
Okay, so I wasn't present for those amendments, so I'm not really sure. Does any, Cole, do you know? So C, just to remind,
so,
Cole,
yeah, this was a kind of holistic cleanup, rule that we did following the change to our licensing framework in 2021. And, it was just ratified, as a final rule, this past month. So, that it was a universal kind of cleanup bill, so you wouldn't have had specific knowledge of this particular change.
I've got one last real important. How does cutting a tail off of a dog make it cold? Are they talking about cold trailing or?
no, so I asked specifically, well, why did you remove the tail? And the individual said that they removed the tails from all of the coyotes because the tails make them cold. I didn't ask for an explanation beyond that.
You were scared too, probably. With the initial.
Keeping my lips
explanation.
sealed.
I know I watch them National Geographic shows and them little foxes in the snow, they all got their tails curled around their nose.
That's right.
Very interesting. Any other questions for Melissa? All right, we need a motion on this NOI. And
I'd move to adopt the notice.
all right, we got Al and Kevin as a second, all in favor, state an aye on the NOI. Aye. Any opposition? No opposition, the NOI is gonna pass. Thank you,
Perfect. Thank
Melissa.
you.
Okay, you're welcome. All right, moving on. We on, receive an overview on the new department target range grant program, Eric Shanks.
All right. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Thank you for your time today. I'm Eric Shanks. I'm the Range Enhancement Coordinator for LWF. And going to talk about a new program, our new Target Range Grant Program, just to bring you up to speed on what we've got going and why we're doing it. And I'm going to try to be as quick and concise as possible because I'm very passionate and excited about this program. So I will talk longer than I probably should sometimes about it. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get into it. I do need to provide you a little bit of background on kind of how this program came about and why we're doing this before we get into the actual details of what we're doing. So in 2019, the Target Practice and Marksmanship Training Act was passed into law. And basically, overall, it makes it easier for state agencies, state natural resource agencies to construct shooting ranges. That was kind of the overall intent of the bill in order to facilitate more ranges getting on the ground for the public. And it did that by amending the Wildlife Restoration Act to, first of all, let us know what they mean by public target range. Secondly, allow these grants to run for 5 years rather than the traditional 2 years that our wildlife restoration grants run for.
as well as, instead of a 75-25% match, if you dedicate funding under this act, you can actually get use 90% federal funding, and you don't have to have a 10% match on your end of the deal. And then in addition to that, they also, this act allows us to use 10% of our wildlife restoration funds, up to 10%, versus just our hunter education fund, grant funds that we normally would use for shooting range activities. So it really just gives us more flexibility. It gives us more flexibility to be able to provide funding to build shooting ranges, as well as with those time extensions, because we all know it takes a long time to build a building, and it takes the state an especially long time. So that's what they're trying to do, is just facilitate state agencies being able to get more ranges on the ground for the benefit of the public, the shooting public. One thing that it is very important to be aware of is that it does not provide any additional funding. So any projects that would be funded out of using this law is simply using our existing funds and wildlife apportionments that were already being given through the Fish and Wildlife Service grant system. It is not providing any additional funding to our agency in order to do these types of projects. And then also, again, in order to make sure that this is accomplishing the purposes of the law, any activities that use this funding source must increase user capacity at ranges, whether that's through an addition to an existing facility or constructing a new facility. You can't just do a remodel of an existing facility, except under some very certain special circumstances. So what this program's objective, or what LDWF's objectives are when it comes to ranges at least, is we want to get more ranges on the ground for the benefit of the shooting public and citizens of Louisiana. And we want to do it as efficiently as possible, utilizing those existing federal funds that were awarded. And we also want to make sure that any range that we're a part of meets those modern industry standards, is a good quality range, not just a berm in somebody's backyard. So, and then our long-term goal is to have a public use, public shooting range that's available to every citizen of Louisiana within a reasonable driving distance. Something that you don't have to drive 2 hours in order to go practice with your firearm. There's something that's convenient to you. So, why is LDWF in the shooting range business? I mean, that's a fair question. And first of all, we have been, for a long time, we actually have 4 shooting ranges that we currently own and operate, as well as an additional air rifle and archery ranges at our Waddell facility here in Baton Rouge. And those are run through our hunter ed program. Our hunter education program and the department promotes the safe use of firearms for hunting and recreational shooting and shooting sports. And that's part of our mission. That's part of the use of the funds that were given from the Fish and Wildlife Service. And so we already do those things. And then there's some more to that though, because as of 2020, 74% of the firearms and ammunition sold in the US were not purchased for hunting purposes. They purchased them for some other purpose, whether that was target shooting or self-defense or whatever the case may be. But it doesn't matter what those firearms and boxes of ammo were purchased for. Those excise taxes that go to fund the conservation activities of this agency are still paid on those firearms and ammunition purchases. So it'd be fair to say that 74% of our PR dollars that come to us are generated by folks that don't hunt. They just shoot for their own purposes, whether that's just recreationally or training or whatever, or shooting sports, whatever the case may be. And then firearm ownership is also growing in America, about 5 million a year, roughly in the last several years. And previous research indicates that of those new firearm owners, less than 10% are purchasing those firearms for hunting. So yet again, we've got a growing demographic of firearm owners who are not necessarily going to be, interacting with our agency per se. And then there's also about 50 million, 56 million people that target shoot and participate in shooting sports around the country. And that's, just to give you a comparison, it's about 14.1 million firearm hunters in the country. So you can see that there's a much larger portion of folks that use a firearm recreationally that don't necessarily go hunting or buy a license from Wildlife and Fisheries, but are actively participating
in providing the funding that, or at least part of the funding that we use to conduct our operations. So this is from a survey from the Council to Advance Hunting and Shooting Sports. And they're basically asked the participants, you know, what's making it tough for you to go and use your firearm safely? And we cannot do anything about the high cost of equipment and ammunition. But what we can look at addressing is access and overcrowding. And so that's kind of the purpose of what we're trying to do is get, you know, address those two issues for our citizens and our shooters in Louisiana. And by doing that, by addressing those needs, will increase our agency relevancy. Whenever we get new shooting ranges built, we promote those opportunities. Because first of all, we'll be reaching out to those, or we're providing a service to those folks who maybe don't buy a hunting license, but they now are going to interact and or at least be aware of wildlife and fisheries and see the opportunities we're presenting to them. So what we do will be relevant to those users. And then also there's a portion of those target shooters that are also hunters, and I count myself in this, there's a portion of those target shooters that are also hunters, and I count myself in that category. And so those are our existing customers, and providing these opportunities and trying to get more ranges on the ground, we're also providing additional services and value and benefit to our existing customers, as well as potentially new constituents. And then one concern, if we don't take any action, if we don't try to at least facilitate, even if we don't build the range ourselves, at least try to work with other folks to get ranges built, is that we've got you potentially have the largest contributors to our PR funds in the form of these firearm owners who don't hunt, as well as the industry, the firearm industry and ammunition industry that collects those excise taxes and cuts the checks for those excise taxes. If the largest portion of the providers of these excise taxes aren't seeing anything going directly to them, or are serving their interests, they may start to question why they pay those excise taxes in the first place. And if those ever went away, that would be a tremendous blow to our agency and how we're funded and how we operate it. So now, with that background section's over, we'll get into what we're actually doing. So this is what's called a pass-through grant system, where we utilize the existing Fish and Wildlife Service funds, and we basically subaward them to a local sponsor. The local sponsor is the one who's going to be responsible for actually doing all the work, getting the design, getting the construction done, as well as operating and maintaining the range. And then it's going to come in the form of a one-time grant. It is a cost reimbursement basis. So it's not like we're giving these folks some money up front. They have to conduct the work, then they can get reimbursed for the costs on that 90-10 basis. They will be responsible for providing that 10% match. That's not something our agency is going to provide. And that can come in several forms. It doesn't have to be their own funds. There's different things that you can use to qualify as match, but regardless of what the mechanism is, they're the ones that have to provide that. And I broke it down into two different types of grants under the program. So the first one, a smaller grant, maximum of $250,000, is basically to get all of the legwork done that has to go into a building. You know, before you ever break ground or put a dozer on site, there's a lot of work that has to occur. And that takes time, that takes money. Plus you want to have a good set of well-designed plans and drawings. And so we set it up to where we're actually going to issue that smaller planning and development grant first in order to do all of that work, or assist the sponsor in doing all of that work, so that that's all done. And again, remember I said there was a 5-year timeline. By breaking it into two different grant types, we're actually giving ourselves even a little more time to make sure that we get everything done. And there are a lot of strings attached to that federal funding when it comes to doing, certain types of environmental assessments that have to occur and things like that. So it may take even a little more time than what would normally be expected. So we're trying to facilitate that. And then the idea is that after someone has been, or an applicant has been awarded that planning grant and gone through that process, in addition to having good quality plans, a good set of business plan and all of those things, then they've also shown that they're a good partner with us, right? They didn't take the money and run, so to speak. So then we look at, they can apply for and receive a construction and equipment grant. in order to actually begin construction of the facility that they designed under the previous grant. This program is going to be open to both public and private sponsors, so like local government entities, recreation boards, those kinds of things, as well as commercial, private operators for who want to build a new range or expand their existing operation. And it is important to note that whether it's public or private, they will have to comply with all the federal, state, and local laws and requirements that apply to these funds as well as the construction process. I'm not going to go through this step by step, but this is basically the process and sort of the timelines that we've set up. And so in essence, after someone has made their application and our selection committee, is going to go through our scoring process and recommend to our administration that these are the projects we'd like to fund based on our available funding, then, we'll run that way and apply with the Fish and Wildlife Service for a grant to fund that specific project. Again, this is going to be a project per project basis. Once the feds approve that project and say, yes, this is all well and good, here's your grant, then we'd enter into an agreement with the sponsor in order to do the work. And not just do the work. Remember, there's that operations and maintenance step that stays out there. And I'm gonna go into a little more detail in just a second on that. So after you've completed the project, 1 year, 3 year, depending on the grant type, then we close out the grant. And that's when it falls on the sponsor to operate that range based on the terms of the agreement that we've made for public access. And that public access has to reflect the amount of federal investment. You can't get $1.5 million and have your range open for 2 hours on a Sunday, so, and that's going to be my job, is to make sure that what we're putting into these ranges, the public is getting out value and benefit. And then we will be monitoring any of these sponsors for the useful life of the project to ensure that they are complying with the terms of those agreements and doing what they said they were going to do. And just as a side note, this is not something that, while we are entering into it with a sponsor, and obviously we have to, it's in the case of, say, a commercial entity, it's that business or that individual, we are putting a deed restriction on the property so that they can't just sell their company and then suddenly this agreement no longer applies. No, if whoever buys the property to operate as a shooting range, they're going to have to come to us, and we're going to have to work through. So just to try again, protect the interests of the public with these public funds. So take it home. What are we trying to get out of this? What do we expect the benefits to be? So first and foremost, obviously, if we put new ranges on the ground, we're going to provide additional opportunity for shooting sports and shooters without utilizing any additional state resources. The sponsor will provide the local match, and the feds are providing the 90% from the federal sources. And so we're not really using our state resources to get these ranges built, or no additional resources for sure. And when we do that, we're successful at that. Ultimately, there should be increased recreational shooting and shooting sports participation, which is going to again, come back to our mission of more safe firearm owners and users and target shooters, as well as increased shooting sports participation, which not only is that a good thing in and of itself, but it also does keep that PR fund, people utilizing and contributing to our Pittman Robertson funds that help our agency. And then one other thing is that we want this to be sustainable over the long haul. We don't want to issue a grant and then see a business close its doors in 3 or 5 years. We want to see the value realized from the money that's going into this. And I'm confident that while we may have our problems and missteps, that we're going to be there, because this is modeled after programs that some states are already doing in other parts of the country, and they're having good success with it. And so we want this to be something where we're getting 20, 25, 30 years of shooting range access out of these investments in getting these ranges built. And just at the bottom there, that's actually a 30,000 square foot indoor shooting range that was built on the campus of Georgia Southern University through a similar type of program in Georgia. And that's what we're trying to do, basically. And got my contact information there, as well as the website for more. There's a lot of details of this program, as you can imagine. But there's my information. If anybody has any questions and wants to reach out to me. And if you have any questions for me right now, I'd be happy to answer
Joe has a couple.
them. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How much money are we talking about would be utilized for this?
We haven't, that is gonna vary from year to year based on how much, because so PR, Pittman Robinson's apportionments with all those new firearm sales and ammunition sales have been going up and up and up. And so right now, there may be a certain portion of our budget, or those monies coming in that aren't, already allocated for use, and that's what we're gonna be funding these projects out of. So it's gonna vary from year to year. I don't know what our current budget is as in terms of how many projects we're going to be able to fund. But it's going to basically come out of the additional PR funds that the agency has that aren't already earmarked for some other purpose.
That's what caught my ear. They amended it to allow this. They amended the public law to allow this
Correct.
for the use of the funds for this purpose.
Well, we already could use these funds for this purpose. For example, we have like I said, we have shooting ranges that we built previously and we already could use the funds. We just had only we could only use our hunter education grant funds and our enhanced hunter education funds. So it was limited to those. We had no flexibility in using any other of our wildlife restoration funds to be able to help, because, these projects do cost quite a bit of money.
You said this would be additional funds as excise taxes increase. Where are these funds currently being utilized and where could they be utilized, the additional funds?
I don't know. I'm not the budget. Randy, I don't know if we have any, or Brian
Yeah.
Clinton may actually be the better person to ask about budget questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Brian McClinton, Undersecretary. Their apportionment has been significantly higher the last few years. So I'm going off of memory. I know this year's apportionment, we've gotten the letter, I think it's $24 million. The previous year, I believe, was $23 million, and the year before that's about 15 million. So if you look at just that increase from the 15 to the 23 and the 24 the last few years, that's a significant amount of money that is going now into that wildlife restoration apportionment to us, which is basically just based on exactly what he said. It's the number of, there's everybody who buys guns and ammunition, that money goes into a pool and it's allocated to the states, not appropriated, allocated based on the number of hunters and the acreage of the state. And so as more and more people are buying ammunition and buying and entering into this and shooting, those numbers have been going up. And so it's actually a sad state, but typically under certain administrations where there's always talk of reduction of gun rights, you tend to see these spikes. So that's sort of what we're experiencing right now. So this program is something that's a great opportunity to take these spikes and not necessarily grow a staff that may go back down, but take that increase and use it on these kind of one-time projects that benefit the state as a whole. So.
But what is that number? What do we anticipate that number to potentially be?
Every year, Commissioner, it changes. So like I said, we just got our apportionments last month. We usually get them in March. And so like I said, I think 2 years ago was around 15 million. 2023 was 23 million. So it jumped
That
up.
money is being utilized currently.
Yes, sir.
Between the 15 million and the 24 million. So that part of my question was, what are we currently utilizing that money for that would go to these range grants?
I don't know the difference in their grant proposal from year to year. That's totally handled under the Office of Wildlife. So what changed in those grants from 22 to 23, I'm not familiar with, sir.
Well, what I would want to follow up a presentation on, since we don't seem to have the answers today, is how much money is this currently? What do we anticipate it to be? What is the money currently being utilized? And what would we be taking away from these other programs to do these grants to other private and public entities?
I can address that. The monies, the monies that are going to be utilized for this program are not going to be taken from any of the existing programs that are running on our wildlife restoration funds. So we're not going to take money out of WMAs to build this. Again, we're looking at using, The short answer to your question, to my understanding, is that as these apportionments have gone up, yet, our staff and our expenses, while expenses go up too, but those haven't changed. We didn't increase staff. We didn't necessarily utilize those overages or surpluses that have been coming in on any particular projects. And so therefore, we want to utilize this money because
We didn't bank it. Brian, you don't have a big slush fund of these grant monies, of these excise tax monies, do you?
Sir?
Do we have a fund where
No.
these excise tax monies are being banked somewhere?
don't forget that they revert, sir. If we don't use them after 2 years, they revert.
Have we ever
back to
let a
the
dollar revert?
No, sir, we have not.
I thought that was gonna be the answer. So we're currently using those dollars.
So I just spoke to the individual who writes the grants. Last year, when the money increased significantly, they didn't apply for the full amount. They set aside some money anticipating this program to go through. So this year, they're going to do the same thing. So as that money has grown the last 2 years, they're keeping their operations at the same level as it was and anticipating that increase to be able to fund a program like this. That once they write those grants for this program, it's not limited to 2 years. You could take that portion of the grant and write multi-year longer grants out of it. So, this isn't taking away from something that wasn't being done.
Well, it dismayed me a little bit that without the commission understanding that we didn't apply for all the money available, which I guess means we left money laying on the table.
No, sir, well, you have 2 years to obligate that money. And then when you
We
obligate
just
the
did it
money.
last year in anticipation of drawing it down this year.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Don't
Okay.
forget, this program, literally, this is new. This is the first year, I've spent the last 9 months developing the rules and regulations of how this program is going to operate. And, so this is brand new and we had to get the framework set to have a process to even do it before we said, okay, now this is how much money we're going to put into it. We knew we had some monies available for it. Otherwise we wouldn't have done it.
Well,
but
we
we
did
didn't-
draw down money. And again, the question that I asked initially is, do we have any idea how much money would be allocated to this program initially?
Hi, my name is Ty Medlin. I'm the Wildlife Restoration Coordinator, so I can answer that question. And just a little background, I think Eric kind of touched on it a little bit. This money is 2-year money. So if we don't obligate it 1 year, we have another year to obligate it. And another kind of crazy thing about it is whenever you do obligate the money, it obligates old money first. So we anticipated this program and we set aside money last year and we plan to set aside money this year while our apportionments are high. We're not changing how we're operating. It's not taking away from any of the other programs. Just while we have that surplus money, this is where we're going to divert it. Last year we set aside about 1.5 million. And this year we'll probably add maybe another million to that, but we're going to be crunching numbers. We got the apportionments and we have to rebudget everything to figure out exactly what our numbers are. But a safe number to tell you right now would be about $2 million.
So if I understood your figures correctly, that would mean that we could give 1 grant a year? As long as that
Eric
you're
said,
quoting as a surplus?
correct.
Just-
Eric set the cap at 1.5 per grant. We could get several small grants where we're spending, $200,000, $300,000 to help them expand the capacity of their normal grants. The construction grant at 1.5 is like the max amount that we would contribute to a full construction project.
Is there any prohibition against the state using this money to build traditional ranges as we have in the past?
We could utilize the money to build ranges for ourselves, but we would also have to man those ranges. So what we're trying,
Have any what?
we would have to man those ranges. So we would have to,
Let me interrupt you there. I thought some of our ranges were manned and some of them were unmanned.
they are. And when I say manned, it's manned and then manage them and maintain them. So it will take agency effort to maintain those. What we're trying to do while we have this surplus money, we know that in the future, this may not be the case. We're trying to get that money out the door to somebody else who will manage those ranges and take the burden off of the financial burden off the agency farther down the road.
When we have this follow-up presentation that I'd like to have, could do we know what I think it's, Woodworth and Bodcall maybe that are, or maybe I'm thinking wrong, that are manned ranges, and Sherburne and one other is not manned.
Pearl River's manned. It's just not manned by us. We also, we have a cooperative agreement. And I actually did have slides in there with what we had going on with those types of things. I took all that out just in the interest of
Maybe
brevity.
you could go
Yeah.
ahead and furnish that to us.
I
so
can.
soon as you got 'em
I'll-
prepared.
Yeah, I'll send those to you, and I have user numbers
Is,
for those
is
types
there a
of things.
reason why some are manned and some are unmanned?
Yes, sir. It's budgets and staffing and headcount. It's the
No,
exact.
no, from a practical standpoint, why does some of them need to have range managers and others don't?
To be on, well, they all have staff on them. It's just a matter of whether or not you have RSOs on the line, calling the line, hot and cold, dealing with the detail operation. And I'm going to be 100% honest and say that, remember I said modern industry standard? The days of having a range just out in the middle of the woods for somebody to go shoot, those are long gone. And to be honest with you, on unmanned ranges, not only in Louisiana, but all around the country, you end up with litter problems. You end up with more problems than the range itself is actually worth to the agency and the users. And of course, when you have run into those problems with unmanned ranges, you also encounter the users, your users don't want to use it. Good users don't want to use it because it's a mess. And then the other thing is that remember all those shooters I was talking about, and those gun owners, many of them are located inside of our cities and our suburban areas that aren't in close proximity to our existing ranges. That's the other good thing about this program is that we're not limited to land we already own or putting it on LWF properties, is that we can actually try to target areas where we need shooting ranges in proximity to the populations, let's say, and through work with the sponsors, the ranges can go where they need to go, not just where we can put them. So that is another benefit of doing this program this type of way.
But I mean, inherently, a shooting range doesn't need to be in a metropolitan area. It's got.
Well, you can have an indoor
It's
range.
got to be in a rural area.
You can have an indoor range.
Excuse me.
You have an indoor target range. Yes, sir. They have indoor target ranges the size of this room. And you can have that right in the middle of the city. And this program can fund those types of ranges.
I would just hope that we would look at give preference, and I assume that we'll have some discretion in who these grants go to, and we'll have some guidelines or.
Yes, sir.
some scoring system or something.
Oh, yes, sir. I've already developed the ranking matrix. We're going to have a selection committee made up of LDWF staff, as well as I'd like to have an industry member on that to offer that industry perspective. And I've developed a scoring matrix. Again, this is a new program. Once we go through this first round, that matrix may have to be adjusted, to make sure we're meeting our needs and doing a good job with it. And there will be some flexibility with the scoring committee. The scoring matrix is really just to shake out the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, and make sure that the quality projects are the ones we're actually considering for funding.
Could you go ahead and finish that also?
What's that?
Could you finish that up? Furnish us with. that also?
Yes, sir. I'll send that to you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just two questions. Are there any sponsors that y'all looking at now, or that the department has had any discussions with?
Yes, sir. I reached out. So over the past several years, I was previously the hunter education program manager who was also over our existing ranges, and I'd had multiple contacts over that time period with folks who were interested in building ranges, looking for help or looking for funding. So yesterday and today, I actually spent time on the phone reaching out to those contacts to let them know that this program is now available and providing that information to them. There's about 7 or 8 of those. And then also I have a list of potential contacts that haven't reached out to me, but that I want to at least make aware that this program is available. And it is on our website for folks to be able to view.
Okay, and the other question, are there any parishes that are you kind of considering or anything for these places to be at or anything?
We don't have any parishes lined up specifically, but one of the contacts yesterday was actually the Acadia Parish Sheriff's Range. They're about to open a new range over there, and So they may look in the future at, offer, expanding, public opportunities on that range, maybe utilizing this program. I know that, there's some existing ranges that may look at expansion. We don't have any particular parishes lined up as of yet. The application window just opened. But I am, trying to work through and make sure that, this is, when I say it's brand new, literally, not only is it new first time, but we just opened the application process at the beginning of April. So,
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
yes, sir. Any other questions?
Any other questions? No. All
Thank
right,
you.
well, thank you very much. Yes. So-
Mr. Chairman, can I?
Yes,
just
go
say-
ahead.
I want to
yes,
thank
any-
Eric for all the hard work he's done with this. I think it's a new direction that we have an opportunity to give more opportunity to all of our citizens to take part in. But it also recognizes the fact that these people that aren't hunters, they do spend some money, lots of money on ammunition, of which we get a big part of. And I think it's a good way to show them that we're doing something for them to get something done. So, he did put a lot of effort into this and certainly way ahead of the game. And I appreciate his effort and I'd like to recognize this. Thank you.
Right. Well, thank you. All right. Item 12, receive a review of the 2022 recreational red snapper season and consider a declaration of emergency. Mr. Jason Adrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I think it was a couple meetings ago, Commissioner McPherson asked me when I might ever bring some good news to this commission. I hope by the time we get to the end of this might be some good news. So I can take off my fish reaper cloak for today. So let's go over the 2022 season. Our allocation was 809,000 pounds roughly. That was because we had an overage in 2021 that we had to pay back. If y'all recall, we opened that season the Friday before Memorial Day, which has been kind of the go-to for the past few years. It was a weekend only 3-fish season, but it included those holidays listed there. We had closed that season on September 18th. We let the landings come in and we had about 39,000 pounds remaining. And so we ran an 8-day 4-fish season to finish that out. So we ended up landing that total of 801,000 pounds, 911 pounds. If you recall a previous news release, we had listed that we had an overage. We found a slight error, and once we corrected that, it was in how federal charter and state charter were apportioned. Once we did that, we actually finished the year with about a 7,000 pound under harvest. And that was, and you can see the differences there. 748,000 pounds roughly were landed by private recreational anglers, about 53,000 pounds by state charter, and about 62,000 pounds by federal charter. This is just a graphical form of how that season went. I won't spend much time on this. This is a tabular form of that season. These two graphics you're familiar with. They end up on our website weekly once we update estimates. Just kind of can see how each week went. Before I get to 2023, I just want to go over a few stats on snapper. So we went back through the data and looked at weights, lengths, and ages since 2014. You can see here weights have trended down a little bit over recent years. You can see charter there generally catches a bigger fish. This doesn't concern me at all, and you'll see why not once we get to the ages. And along with weights, lengths have trended down a little bit. But remember, the scale on this is it's not a large scale, so the differences aren't that great. But you can see there, the average length of fish is about 23 inches that are landed. I mentioned ages. You can see here our ages have been pretty stable, with charter catching a slightly older fish, but not much, 6.9 years old, so almost 7 years old on average compared to 6 years old on average. But this slide is why those lengths and weights don't really concern me too much. We're harvesting a consistent age in those fish. So while those lengths and weights are going down a little bit, those ages have remained consistent. So really don't see any issue with this fishery at this time. This is just how our seasons have gone in the past. You can see they've been pretty variable from 40 days to 146 days. So in a variety of different structures that we've tried. And a lot of that obviously is dependent on the ability of folks to get out and fish, weather, lots of things. So what do we have for 2023? Our allocation, if you don't know, our allocation has increased. There was a new allowable biological catch set through the Gulf Council's scientific committee. That went through the Gulf Council. Department of Commerce published those allocations back in February. So we now have 934,000 pounds to fish for next year. Currently, our season is set to open that Friday before Memorial Day in that weekend only structure, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, with those holidays listed there. One thing we're going to ask you is, would you like to consider a different season given we have an increase in allocation? And we'll get to that at the end. I have to throw this in. I gave you all some projections, but as you know, I like to tell you those are pretty much useless once we start fishing because of all the assumptions we have to make. And then you throw in weather at the time folks get out, lodging availability, fuel prices, all those things. So that table down there is a rough idea. I wouldn't, that's why we have LaCreel. We'll start fishing and we'll see where things go. Although I do have the Magic 8-Ball up here, and I will tell you our marine fisheries Magic 8-Ball is pretty good. It's got a pretty good track record. So with that, the declaration of emergency that we brought y'all and our recommendation is opening the Friday before Memorial Day, a 3-fish bag limit at the current 16-inch minimum size, but running that as a daily season with a consideration for having enough to reopen for Labor Day weekend or to get us there. And with that, I'll take any question.
Yeah, I have a question. Okay, so we had that miscalculation and we were under actually. So as I recall, whatever was under, we don't get it back for the next year. It's a use it or lose it deal, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So we just, it's better to have an overage if anything, and you hurt yourself again for the next season is.
Yeah, you obviously want to
use your quota. If you
want to
can.
use your quota and try to get as close as possible.
Right.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's good. I don't have any other questions. I mean, I'll just make a comment. I think that, all of my response, the weekend and 3-day fish was really good last year to all of the users that I spoke with. And it's, I think the way y'all have it, figured out this year, it would work the same way. And I would just think that we should look at the same thing that we did last year by trying to make sure that we get, if we have to close to make sure we get Labor Day, we would, consider that.
Mr. Chairman. It says daily season over. Does that mean 7 days a week?
Yeah, 7
Oh.
days a week. Correct.
Okay. That's all I could say. That's if we could do this and go all the way through Labor Day, it would be great. Because it's been ever increasing. So if the department thinks we'll be able to do this, and I'm sure the secretary will have the ability to limit it if we start reaching certain numbers that we believe we won't be able to keep it open as long.
Correct. The declaration of emergency would give that authority to the secretary as we're monitoring landings that he can open and close as needed.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the difference in effort that we've seen in the past between a weekend only and a 7 day a week is there's roughly 20% more effort. Is the difference.
I said, we got a motion for declaration of emergency. I guess we need to adopt that motion. We need a motion to
So
pass
moved.
it. Kevin, you want a motion? That? And we need a second. Second by, Mr. Joe. All in favor of the
Public comment,
declaration?
Mr. Chairman.
Sir?
I know you don't have any cards, but also ask for public comment. prior to taking
Okay.
it.
Any public comment on the declaration? Going once, twice, 3 times? There's none. So we'll ask for a vote on the declaration because we have a first and a second. All in favor, state aye. Aye. Any opposition? No opposition. The motion's gonna carry. The
Thank you.
red snapper season is set. All right. Let's see. Next, we got a report by Cole Garrett on the legislation.
I know Tommy didn't take the opportunity to give Miss Susan any grief this morning, so I'll thank her for sticking me last again. All right. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members. It's that time of year again where we spend a lot of time at the big building downtown. The 2023 regular legislative session convenes on Monday, April 10th. This is going to be a fiscal session, which means that you're dealing with taxes and fiscal measures and not a whole lot of general bills, but keep in mind, we've got a couple of recovering legislators here on the commission. Y'all are well aware of this, but each member does get 5 general bills to file. Good thing about fiscal sessions is they are shorter. So it convenes April 10th. It will adjourn June 8th. And so you'll only have to put up with these presentations for me this month and 2 additional ones. So that's always a good thing. I'll jump right into it. There are some general bills dealing with this commission and also with licensing that I wanted to put on your radar because some of them are not great bills. The first of which is House Bill 221. This would arbitrarily say that any rulemaking that's done by this commission, if we're promulgating a rule, we would have to choose 2 that must be repealed. I will make the point that we are already under an obligation to review our rules and regulations every 5 years. There's also an opportunity for any member of the public to petition us to review a rule at any time. This is simply an arbitrary thing that says if we're doing 1, we get rid of 2, whether they are necessary or not. And obviously that's problematic when you're trying to use public engagement and the APA process to do rulemaking. So I would suggest to you that this is a pretty bad bill for bodies like yourselves trying to make rules. The next bill I have is House Bill 503. This is the single department initiative. Y'all are all familiar with this issue. This is the issuance of Louisiana Hull ID numbers for vessels that do not qualify for U.S. Coast Guard Hull IDs. Y'all have recently taken emergency action to allow for surface shallow water vessels to continue to do this activity through 2024, but otherwise get in line with the Coast Guard standards. This would actually just take that mandate that you have to issue these to non-qualifying vessels, take that mandate away and make us consistent with the federal law. So again, this is a good bill from the agency's perspective and gets us in compliance with federal regulations. Senate Bill 119 is another one that is extremely problematic for this agency. As y'all are all aware, we did a comprehensive license restructure in 2021. Part of that was to create the youth hunting license. The youth hunting license is limited to those individuals who interact with the agency, either receive deer or turkey tags from us or engage in youth lottery hunts. We set the price of that license at $5. To Brian's credit and his staff, the fiscal note on that was almost identical to what we are actually receiving from these youth hunters. And what that tells me is the $5 youth license is not preventing anybody who was previously hunting deer or turkey or getting tags from us from getting this license. So I don't think that it's a impediment to those individuals, and certainly small game, duck, dove, any of those hunters, you do not need to have this license. It's only for those deer or turkey. Bottom line is this is an instrument that's going to cost us $800,000 next year and the year after that and every year beyond that. Only 100,000 of that is actual direct license money that we collect from individuals. 700 to 750,000 of that is federal money that we draw down through Pittman Robinson. Mr. Chairman, yes, sir.
Mr. Joe has it.
So, in the past, and I think the agenda calls for that this time, for us to decide if we want to take a position on the bill. Can we do that as we go through the bills?
That would be a fine way to do it. Yes, sir. Or you can make notes and we can do it in Globo at the end, however you'd like to do it.
I think that would be a good way to handle it, to go back to the beginning and, you know, either oppose or support or not have any opinion on it. Go back to the first one.
You want to go back to the beginning and have any, all right. All righty.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
And just, I guess, Cole, if you would maybe give us your opinion on if it's something that we should decide now or something we should monitor till next meeting or anything like that, where we don't really, if we don't have to take a stance on it and it's going to be seen later, then maybe something to think about also.
I'll do my best to give you what I think the impacts are going to be to the agency. I'll say that I'm a classified employee, which means that I can't take a position on legislation. Certainly y'all can. The three bills that I just mentioned, I think are worthy of this commission's consideration for a position. So 221 and Senate Bill 119, I think have negative impacts for the agency. Certainly 503 was a department bill that closes a loophole or a conflict between state and federal law. And I think that's something that would be worthy of support.
I think what we're saying, then let's just go back and I would assume House Bill 221, we'd probably just monitor that bill. It's probably not going anywhere.
We certainly are going to monitor it. Yes, sir.
And 503 and 119, we'd want to be supportive of those bills.
119 is detrimental.
I mean, we'd be against that bill, yes.
Yes, sir. Senate Bill 201 allows for electronic meetings for boards and commissions. This would affect bodies such as yourself, anybody who meets more than 6 times a year. Only a third of the meetings would be able to be done via electronic means, and you would still have to physically hold the meeting at what they're calling an anchor location. So that may add some flexibility to boards like yourselves, but would still have a in-person component requirement to it as well. So it's an interesting one. Certainly we're getting more used to meeting electronically, and the legislature is acknowledging that with this bill.
So would we be in support of that bill? Or
Just monitor.
I think that's a good one to monitor.
Okay.
Like I said, it may give y'all some additional flexibility, but certainly we want to make sure that there's consideration for public input as well.
All right, moving on.
Wildlife bills. So House Bill 448 actually pays a judgment for the Crooks versus the state. That's the Catahoula Lake litigation that drug on for decades. This is only for mineral royalties and expert witness fees that were incurred during the litigation. It's coming from the state general fund. It has no fiscal effect on this agency.
Oh, could you tell us the author of these bills as we go through them also?
Yes, sir. This is a Representative Riser is this one. If you want me to backtrack on the other ones, I can do that pretty quickly. House Bill 221, the rulemaking one, that's Representative Mark Wright. House Bill 503 for the poll identification numbers is Representative Kenny Cox. Senate Bill 119 is Senator Stuart Cappy. And Senate Bill 201 for the boards and commissions electronic meetings is Ms. Sharon Hewitt. Moving on under the wildlife bills, House Bill 465, this is by Representative Valerie Hodges. It would exempt Livingston Parish from the Scenic Rivers Act. That would affect two water bodies, the Tickfaw and Blind Rivers, or portions of them that are within Livingston Parish. This is problematic, I think, just from a policy standpoint, where you're going to exempt parishes from a statewide program. Certainly the parish or the people who have these rivers in their parish have the ability to petition to remove these rivers from the program itself, but that's a different action than actually saying we as a parish are not subject to a statewide program. So I think that this can be achieved if that's the will of the people who live in Livingston Parish, but I don't know that this is the best mechanism to do that. Certainly we'll have that conversation with the author. I think as it stands now, it is a problematic just from a policy standpoint. I would agree. Another bill that's potentially problematic, although it may seem fine on its face, is House Bill 570. This is permissive. It would authorize the commission and the department to establish a $5 bounty on feral hogtails. But just know that once that is there and available to you, there's probably going to be some pressure to do so. I know Dr. LaCour talked to you a lot about feral hogs and the problems we have. I know that y'all have heard many times you cannot just shoot your way out of this. And anytime that you make a monetary incentive on a species, you can almost guarantee you're not going to get rid of that species, right? Because now if you get close to eradication, you're taking money away from people who have come to rely on it. There's a fiscal note on this. This would be potentially a $2 million hit to our conservation fund annually to manage and pay out this fund, assuming the people who hunt feral hogs apply for the $5 bounty.
Al?
Didn't at one point we were talking about this and found there was a lot of fraud that was going on in other.
Yeah, I believe the
areas?
Fort Benning situation in Georgia showed that they had a slaughterhouse nearby, and as you know, there is a domestic equivalent for the feral hog, which is the domestic hog, and pigtails are pigtails.
I'd suggest we oppose it.
Mr. McClinton would like to add something on this, I believe.
Whisper to you, but thank you. I want to just make a note that fiscal note is, I think it's 1.8 million, is based on existing hog harvest that the department estimates. So if this were to incentivize people to increase, that's a floor. That's not going to be the ceiling of it. That's basically just based on existing harvest now. Thank you.
So the $2 million is a floor?
Yes,
Not a cap?
Yes, sir.
It's based on the amount of harvest, and it's also with the assumption, I understand, that if each one of those pigs that are currently harvested would be eligible for the bounty.
Yes, sir.
Randy?
I was just going to mention, this is the 5-year average of our previous 5 years. Y'all saw the presentation from Dr. LaCour, I think it was last month. And so we took that number and extrapolated that out. And like Brian is mentioning, that's the floor, right? Because you incentivize, then potentially you can be paying out more because that harvest potentially could go up, right? Which may not be a bad thing, but like Mr. Garrett is indicating, is that once you incentivize it, there's going to be no eradication process that occurs. Like you will see what happened at Fort Benning, where they had no appreciable decline. People were turning tails in, and that was it. They were going to the sale barns. They were getting domesticated hogs, getting the tails off of them, and coming and pay it. Now, we just like our nutria control program, I think that's the model that they're looking at. That's a federal fund that's, you know, provided to the agency. But we have to have a consultant, you know, a private entity that actually operates that, or else it's gonna take more staff time, you know, a lot of accounting that goes on. So, that cost, I think, is included in that of $200,000 or $300,000 a year just to administer that program.
Go ahead, Joe.
What is the funding source? Is there a funding source for processing for Hunters for Hungry?
There is a fund, the Hunters for the Hungry actually had a fund. Now it just has an escrow account associated with it for people who are willing to make the donation for Hunters for the Hungry. We collect those donations at point of sale. Whenever you buy your license, we offer if anyone wants to make a donation, and then that money goes to the treasury and is given to the Hunters for the Hungry through an escrow account. So it's currently, it's just donation based, and it's not, appropriated to us anymore. It's all handled at the Department, the Treasury.
It obviously generates enough money to fund those processing costs. Is that a correct statement?
I would have to ask their executive director. I don't believe that it fully funds. I think they get a lot of processors who donate their time and effort to do that. I do not believe it fully funds the processing efforts.
Before the escrow account was established, Commissioner McPherson, we had the money would come to the department, we would collect it, then we would issue it to them via contract. And those annual appropriations were about $90,000 a year. I don't know if those numbers have gone up or down, but that's an educated estimate on what they receive in donations.
I'm just thinking that a great amendment with this bill is that the hog has to be donated to the Hunters for the Hungry program.
That would probably be better
That's
than
just
having to judge a
opposes it.
tail and see if it's a domestic pig or not.
What's gonna stop a hunter from, let's say they just find somebody from another state that they can get just pigtails and bring them in and say they were killed in Louisiana.
Yeah,
Then the
fraud
fund
is
goes
certainly a
down.
concern.
You open Pandora's box after.
Fraud is certainly a concern, and again, unlike the Nutria Control Program, which is run through QIPRA with federal money, this would be taking money out of the conservation fund to fund this effort.
That's what I mean.
The final bill here, if we're ready to move on, is actually a concurrent resolution, and it's one of those rare ones where it actually amends the Louisiana Administrative Code, so Title 76 through a concurrent resolution of the legislature. And it would exempt Rockefeller and Marsh Island refuges from the self-clearing permit requirements. There were several legislators who expressed some concern and opposition to us including those two refuges as part of our self-clearing permits. Their primary opposition was, you've got a bunch of things on here that says, did you hunt, did you camp, did you horseback ride, did you berry pick? Well, none of those activities are actually allowed on the refuge, and their concern was that it's taking users more time to fill those out than go and do the few limited activities that occur on there. So I actually worked with Representative Bo Boyer on this to take a bill that would have cut some funding and hit us fiscally and convert it to a resolution. So that's kind of a compromise instrument right there. Carbon capture.
Mr. Chairman, go ahead. I'm concerned about that resolution. I know that was a compromise that was made, but it could be shifted back to a bill that could.
No, sir. So it cannot be shifted to a bill. Pre-file deadline and the fiscal nature of this session limits the number of general bills that can be filed. And so you're not going to see any bills that are filed. It's going to stick as a resolution.
One left over, they're not going to be able to do it once the session begins.
My appreciation is that all general bills had to be pre-filed prior to the pre-file deadline.
Okay. it's still a concern.
And again,
I
all of
think it's
these,
a
we are
big
going to
concern.
monitor, and you'll be getting updates on these monthly.
I would just suggest that they, that the department on behalf of the commission not support that.
Again, we are not in support. We as the agency don't support or oppose any of the bills. We
Well,
talk
I
about impacts to
understand.
the agency.
But the department can do certain things in public that show support and at least bring up the problems that could occur if this self-clearing permit does in the future pass, and what kind of consequences it could have, not only on those particular ones, but some other places that you might want to go that route too in the future. Anyway, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Joe, you have something? I just saw your light on it. All right, go ahead, Cole.
I've got carbon capture as the next area of bills. It's wildlife adjacent, so I've got it here in my presentation. Y'all are all aware that we hold 1.5 million acres of property. We own that property in the state. Many of them may potentially be places where you could capture and sequester carbon. We actually have two operating agreements on Maurepas WMA currently, and another one on Sherburne. And so we are receiving rentals on those right now and stand to receive more money from once injection begins. So we have an interest in these bills. We are not the regulatory agency of this activity. That's going to be Department of Natural Resources as well as the federal EPA. But again, however, as landowners and regulators of seismic activity, these do somewhat affect us. So I guess kind of generally, these are all ones that we're tracking. I don't know that it warrants taking a position on any of them currently, but certainly we're interested in what happens to them. I'm going to run through them very quickly. Please stop me if you have any questions. House Bill 10, this is Representative Robbie Carter. It removes the ability for eminent domain for operators. So if you've got a willing landowner surrounding a unwilling landowner, they can't force that unwilling landowner to join up as part of a unit and require them to sequester carbon under their property. House Bill 35 is also a Robbie Carter initiative. It would prohibit projects, carbon storage projects in St. Helena Parish. We do own 129 acres in St. Helena Parish. That's the Hutchinson Creek WMA. That's not a large tract of land. I don't know this bill is really going to have that much effect. I don't even know if this is the kind of pore space that would be susceptible to it. But kind of like the scenic rivers thing, you take an entire parish out of something that's regulated on a statewide basis. That's potentially problematic. House Bill 120 would prohibit permitting carbon storage wells on Lake Maurepas. One of the operating agreements that we have on the Maurepas Swamp WMA also incorporates the entirety of the lake. There's a potential that if this bill passes, any wells that would try to inject carbon into those formations would have to be forced onto wildlife property. The thing that we manage first and foremost is for the preservation, protection of the habitat and the wildlife resources. So there's some potential negative impact to this if all the injection wells have to occur on land, particularly our property. House Bill 276, this would place a moratorium on carbon storage on Maurepas as well as Maurepas Swamp WMA. This is from Representative Wheat. It's asking for a pause. And so that also may delay injection. It may hinder if injection ever occurs on this, depending on how long the pause is. We do have an operating agreement where we stand to benefit if injection occurs. So that potentially has an impact for us as well. Representative Wheat also in House Bill 308 demands an environmental impacts study be performed as part of a permitting requirement for carbon storage. Again, we are not the regulatory agency. That would be the EPA and Department of Natural Resources, but it may impact us as a landowner. House Bill 312 deals with the liability and damage from carbon storage. There's some statutory limitations for carbon storage operators. It would remove those limitations and subject them to, potentially greater liability if carbon escaped or damage occurred in some way. The one bill that I will say will absolutely be detrimental to us as landowners of land in Louisiana is House Bill 453. This is by Representative Mack. And what it says is any injection of carbon would have to occur beneath the Gulf of Mexico. So obviously that takes the 1.5 million acres of property that Wildlife and Fisheries owns and removes it, takes it out of play. So that's definitely a potential loss of a revenue stream, which may or may not come to fruition, but it definitely would keep us from ever being able to take advantage of carbon storage. House Bill 454 requires parish approval for any carbon storage project that may occur within that parish. It would make it go to a parish-wide election ballot saying, citizens, do you approve or disapprove of storing carbon in your area? And then finally, Speaker Shake Snyder has House Bill 571, which does a lot. It deals with notice for carbon. It deals with distribution of funds. So any revenue that the state receives, so not Wildlife and Fisheries, we were thankfully carved out of this, but the state, from state water bottoms or state lands, the parish would receive, I think, about 30% of that, and that would go into the parish for their use. It deals with liability. It creates a trust fund. It deals with recordation and extraction tax. So there's a lot going on in that bill. It's certainly one we're gonna follow closely. But again, I will say the direct impact from the distribution of funds, we were carved out of that, and it's only applicable to state-owned lands and waters. No one else has any questions about carbon capture. I will move on to fisheries bills. So we got a couple of, House Bill 161 deals with tax exemptions for commercial fishermen and processors. This is already a tax exemption that's optional and available. This bill would just make it mandatory that these people would receive this exemption. House Bill 255 is a tax credit for oyster shell recycling. We currently team up with CRCL to get participating restaurants to get their oyster shells served on the half shell back and then returned to the water as culture plants. So this would just create a tax credit for that. It would be capped at $2,000, but it's a good, incentive to make sure that we're returning oyster shells to the water. House Bill 438, this was an oyster task force initiative. A couple of years ago, we had decoupled the public oyster seed ground vessel permit and created a vessel permit and a gear license. The function, one of the unintended consequence of calling it a gear license was that you cannot exchange a gear license amongst people with different residencies. And so a vessel owner who wanted to hire a non-resident captain to run his boat, that captain would have to get a different permit. That wasn't really the goal of that. So this is a cleanup bill to kind of reunite those two things under the same vessel. There are two shrimp and crawfish labeling bills, one by Representative Cormier. That's the first one you see, House Bill 528. This would actually authorize Wildlife and Fisheries to assist the Department of Health in enforcing this, and it would create pretty large civil penalties, $1,000 for the first offense, $2,000 for the second, $3,000 for the third, and a loss of your restaurant license there. This is for mislabeling of shrimp or crawfish as domestic if it in fact is an imported product. We currently do not enforce this. This is strictly a violation of the sanitary code. And so this bill would authorize us to enforce it and create those larger civil penalties. House Bill 600, I'm skipping down past to 600. This attacks the same thing, but it says you'll receive a $100 civil fine after you've had an opportunity to correct the deficiency. So while these two things address the same thing, one of them is not like the other. The 528 is certainly has a lot more teeth in it and may result in better compliance. House Bill 576, we are back to Menhaden bills, it appears. This bill is filed by Representative Orgeron. It does a couple of things. It creates a a half-mile exclusion zone coastwide for a majority of the year, but that actually bumps out to a mile between August 1st through October 31st. My understanding is that's to be cognizant of spawning seasons. It also establishes buffer zones around Breton and Chandeleurs of a half mile, 3 mile exclusion zone off of between Caminada Pass and Barataria. So essentially Fouchon and Grand Isle. And then it establishes a 1 mile exclusion zone from Timbalier to Grand Terre Islands. The final thing it does is, in addition to the buffer zones or exclusion zones, it creates a 266 million metric ton quota of menhaden that can be harvested within Louisiana waters.
What is the current average harvest if this limits it to 266?
I will defer to Patrick Banks. Patrick, Mr. Banks. Current annual harvest tonnage for menhaden out of Louisiana waters.
Yeah, I'm gonna defer to Jason. I think it's around 800
A lot of deference here.
million metric tons, but I'm gonna let Jason.
Thankfully, the question's asking metric tons.
That's right.
That's right. It's, and that's actually a typo. I believe in the bill, it's 266,000 metric tons, not million metric tons. Current harvest is somewhere in the neighborhood of on average, somewhere in the neighborhood of 400,000 metric tons.
Thank you, Mr. Adrian, and I will be sure to correct my typo.
Cool, one more question.
Yes, sir.
Right now, the buffer zone is 1/2 mile, right?
It's a 1/4 mile, with some larger exclusion zones around those areas that are mentioned here, Breton Sound, Grand Isle, and Timbalier.
So they wanting to push a 1 mile buffer instead of a 1/4 mile buffer?
To a half mile for a majority of the year, and then a full mile for between August 1st and October 31st.
Oh, okay, I see it now. We gotta be careful with that bill. All right.
There's no further questions. I'll move on. Another slate of fisheries bills. These are Senate bills. Senate Bill 90 by Robert Mills, Senator Robert Mills. This is dealing with the commercial use of surface water. This is very similar to a bill he brought last year. It's recognizing that right now payment to the state for water being used from any surface is surprisingly voluntary. This would make it mandatory, require the mineral board to set a fair market value, and our agency would actually be the beneficiary of a lot of this revenue because that would be put towards the aquatic plant and invasive species control fund. So we would certainly, I think from a state perspective, it's a good thing to get money, and probably unconstitutional not to get money for things of value. But also it helps this agency fund aquatic plants, especially the picture you see here. I don't know how well you can see it. That's like Bistano. That's a lot of water coming out of there. A lot of people use this for fracking, and in the background, you can see all the salvinia on it too. So I thought that was a good picture to capture what this bill tries to address.
Is there an exemption for agriculture?
There is an exemption for riparian landowners, including agricultural use. It does not say anything. I think the exemption would also be for riparian landowners that do commercial activity, like all these plants that are up and down the river as well. I think they are exempt as riparian landowners. But what it would not allow is what you're seeing here, which is extraction, putting them in trucks and taking them off-site for commercial purposes. Senate Bill 99 by Senator Lambert. This is adding red snapper to the 3-day possession limit. He did this previously with both speckled trout and redfish. This is exclusively for people who have camps that are on the water and transport of their fillets properly bagged, properly labeled via boat to their house. Senate Bill 133 was filed by Senator Hinskins. It provides for the Menhaden fishery, and that is about what it does. It appears to me to be a placeholder bill. I don't see anything that it does, but I think that he's got an instrument out there in case he needs one. And then Senate Bill 161, this is by Senator Lambert. This creates the Louisiana Small Wild Catfish Processors Act. And it essentially says that people who are processing wild catfish, that is a cottage industry, so they are not covered by the sanitary code. And it would limit this exemption to processors who sell less than 400 pounds per month. I wish I could give you more information on that. I have no idea how many processors this may cover, but I assume Senator Lambert knows at least one.
Mr. Chairman, this is a terrible bill. I mean, allowing anyone to be able to sell their catch that processes and not have to meet the sanitary code is awful. I would suggest that that be brought up because the people are going to be eating this fish and there's no sanitary conditions where they're cutting these fish at and being sold. It's like shucking oysters in your backyard and bringing them to the restaurant if you process your own stuff that you catch.
Mr. Chairman. Wouldn't all these people have a fresh catch license from the department?
I believe they would have to have a real deal, because these are not, the fresh products license is for the fishermen to sell their catch directly. This is actually a wholesale retail dealer. So they would have the wholesale retail dealer license. They would just be exempt from the sanitary code because they're selling direct to consumers.
What is the fresh, is my term right, fresh catch license?
The fresh products license. And that allows the fishermen to sell their catch directly to consumers, but they're not processors. They're commercial fishermen.
So you said processors, retailers, they're not retailers because they don't have a retail license.
As I understand it, the individuals who would be subject to this bill would hold the wholesale retail dealer's license because they are not commercial fishermen selling directly to a consumer. They receive their catfish from fishermen.
But you still have fishermen selling their catch directly to the consumer.
We do through the fresh products
And
license.
this wouldn't affect that.
No, sir.
And just an added piece of information here, and unfortunately, I have not reviewed the bill yet, but these processors also, unfortunately, are subject to USDA regulations. So these guys are already under a tremendous amount of regulatory oversight. So I've got to review this bill to give you a little bit better idea, but nothing in this bill looks to me that it would make these folks sort of make the world blind to what these folks are doing, because USDA is already exercising a lot of oversight over these things. We tried a number of years ago to try to help the wild crawfish processors stay outside of this USDA program, but the USDA highly regulates them as well, just like they do the farm catfish. So there is a lot of regulatory oversight on these folks already.
So that concludes the fisheries bills, brings me to the enforcement bills. House Bill 4, this is going to be an interesting one. This is dealing with criminal trespass on the running waters of the state. This is by Representative Tony Bacala. It says that criminal trespass shall not apply to any person operating a vessel on the running waters of the state. My understanding is this comes out of the Wagley case, where a gentleman was fishing over private property. He was given a citation for criminal trespass. He prevailed at the district court as well as the Court of Appeals, and then the Supreme Court denied him writs. And so at least in one Court of Appeal, the courts have held recognizing the civil code and the ability to traverse navigable waters without it being a criminal trespass. So this certainly has implications with the public recreational access bills that have come in years past. I certainly expect there to be a good amount of discussion on this bill. House Bill 59 deals with the operation of personal watercraft at night. The law does not allow anybody to run a jet ski or Sea-Doo at night right now. This bill would allow that if they are properly equipped with U.S. Coast Guard lighting standards. Several other states allow this very thing. I've asked enforcement to review this. Their initial response was, yeah, we think that if they've got Coast Guard lighting standards, that should be the same as any other vessel. We're not too concerned about it. House Bill 207 makes it unlawful for minors to swim in any river that generates hydroelectric power without having a PFD. From what I read in the bill, there is no limitation on how close you are to the hypolimineal dam that's creating the hydroelectric power. I think that may be potentially problematic. You got people swimming at the start of the river without a PFD several miles away. But anyway, that is a bill that we're tracking. House Bill 297 deals with the prescription for litter violations. This is something that will affect us, and I think it will affect us in a positive manner. It creates a 2-year prescriptive period to prosecute or issue citations for simple or intentional littering. Last year, there was a bill saying that we can use video surveillance evidence and use that to capture license plates, and there's a presumption that person did it. So what we tend to do is we take videos, we review the evidence, we investigate cases, and sometimes this takes longer than the 6 months that's allowed under the Code of Criminal Procedure to prosecute these cases. So this gives us a little additional time to conduct investigations and issue citations. House Bill 299, this deals with the enforcement of federal firearms laws and in fact prohibits the enforcement of federal firearms laws that may interfere with the Second Amendment right for somebody to own firearms. So certainly as people who love the Constitution, this sounds like a great bill on its face, but I did want to point out some potential issues. And one of Mr. Shank's presentation, I think, is a great segue for this. We received $24 million last year in Pittman Robinson money. $24 million in Pittman Robinson money that's excise taxes on sales of guns and ammunition. If this law passes, there's a potential, and they tried to write it out. It said that it's not going to affect any existing excise taxes, but I would have a concern that it might potentially affect our Pittman Robinson funding moving forward. The other thing to consider is we are duly commissioned law enforcement agents. We do enforce federal game and fish laws. And so this law would be telling our federally commissioned enforcement agents, you cannot enforce or comply with federal laws that are on the books. So I think there's some potential concerns with this bill.
A felon in possession of a firearm, that's a state or a federal violation?
Both.
Or it could be either.
It's both. We have laws on the books that prohibit convicted felons from holding firearms, but there's a federal regulation as well. And I don't believe, that could have an impact as well if they consider that to be something that interferes with someone's Second Amendment rights. I believe the bill author is Representative Fryman on this one, but I have to double check that one. There's no other questions. The final two bills before I cut y'all loose for lunch. House Bill 453 deals with vehicular pursuits. Y'all will be happy to know that our enforcement agency has recently reviewed and adopted new vehicular pursuits policy. So we've already addressed what this bill seeks to address. So that doesn't give us a lot of concern, but what does is the bill would provide for strict liability for an agency in the event of damage or bodily harm as a result of vehicular pursuit. Anytime you increase liability for the agency, that's somewhat of a concern, but just on its face for the purposes of the policy, I think that we've already complied with a lot of what this law would require. Final one is House Bill 563. This is a incentive fund for law enforcement agencies. You will notice the eligible agencies are municipal police, sheriffs, and state police. So even though we are a statewide law enforcement agency, LWF is specifically not included to receive an incentive fund to get men and women here for our agency. With that, that concludes my presentation. I know that y'all like to maybe go back through and talk about taking positions on certain instruments.
I'm sorry, Cole, could you go back to number 4, House Bill 4?
Yes, sir.
What appellate court was that held that? You know, I'll get
I
it
knew
later.
you would ask me.
I'll get it later. I'm sorry. I didn't
Oh.
mean, yeah.
Which one? It was the First Circuit?
Well, that's a
Right.
huge deal. I don't know how, if you understand, on the Mississippi River and the Batra land, that is huge, and that is a huge change in the law that's been there for one of the first cases came out of my area, out of Tinsall Parish, where hunters were hunting over Batra land, and actually Judge Bracken was the district court judge. And then there was a case that went all the way to the United States Supreme Court.
Out of East Carroll.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's a huge deal.
Yes, sir. It was the First Circuit. I will tell you, the First Circuit's opinion was this is not criminal trespass, period. They did not offer up any dicta or explanation other than we concur with what the district court's findings. And I think maybe that may be one of the reasons why the Supreme Court didn't take it up, but
it also hampers our ability to, when it comes to people that want to take their boats when the river's up and go out to the ridges and just shoot deer and cut their heads off. Being able to prosecute them for trespassing is a big deal for that. So anyway, that's significant.
Cool.
yes, sir.
One question, on the last item that you spoke about, House Bill 583, how come, why wasn't wildlife put in that bill?
That we just weren't. This is the speaker's bill. He didn't talk to me about it. I don't know what his, what his goals are here, but clearly it was to incentivize recruitment for city police, parish level, and the state police.
Jack, would.
Mr. Chairman, we're gonna approach the speaker to include us in that bill because certainly we're having problems recruiting
Right.
ourselves. So I don't see any reason why he shouldn't include us, but we're gonna make that effort. And in fact, I've instructed Lieutenant Colonel Uval to get in touch with him and set up something where we can talk to him about it. I think he'll include us in it.
Mr. Secretary, I totally agree with you. If they're gonna do it, we should be included. Do we really have a recruitment problem? I remember when I sat over there in that big building, one of my largest requests was, can you help me get on with wildlife and fisheries enforcement or state police? I never knew that there was a problem with recruitment.
Well, at some point in time, they made some adjustments that really helped our recruiting. But the time has passed and nothing has been addressed to upgrade that. Our starting salary for a recruit is $46,000 a year for a man to wear a gun, put his life on the line, go deal with
But
people.
is this bill gonna deal with salary or just
It's gonna be,
just gonna be recruiting,
it
right?
appears to me that it's gonna be,
applicants for the academy?
it's gonna be incentive programs, like they have in Baton Rouge here. I think there's a sign-up bonus of $15,000 if you sign up with the sheriff's department here. And these are the kind of things that we're competing against, and we certainly don't have that mechanism or that tool in our tool chest to offer that too. So I think this bill will address that from my understanding of it. Okay. it's an incentive to initially.
I understand, but
provide
we
that.
don't have a problem with getting qualified applicants every time we open up the application process.
I can tell you the
And
numbers have
state
been.
police doesn't either, as far as I know.
No. The numbers have been dropping. We've been watching the number of applicants we've had in this recent academy versus what the numbers were a couple of years back. We have seen a substantial drop in the numbers of people that are applying for it. But you know, it's not just the applicant thing. I think we have a responsibility to our people to be able to afford them a good salary to where they can take care of their families.
But this doesn't have anything to do with.
No, sir.
So, Jack, I agree with you. You know, we need, some type of incentive program for, our younger recruits, whether or not what law enforcement in, I have 3 children that's in law enforcement, and every one of them that chose to go in that career, it was the incentive program that pushed them in there, and all of them are underpaid for what they do, to go out in today's society and deal with the public as we know it, right there. So, I think we need to push as hard as we can to add that in there. So, all right, Cole, that's all I have.
Y'all are not obligated to take any position on bills. If you'd like to run through the list again to see if you want to, I'm happy to do that, or this can conclude my presentation, however you'd like to proceed.
Any questions for Cole? No
Did you-
question.
Did you say at one point that you had a suggested list for our consideration? I know we had said that we were supportive of 503, we were opposed to 119. Green is,
Green would have a positive impact on also efficiency management. So
these aren't in the same order as on.
they're not. I did those in numeric order just to throw you off, but I can go through again very briefly to let you
It
know
doesn't take much.
what my recommendations would be. So on, Miss Susan, if I could get the lights back off so I can see what I'm looking at here. No, ma'am, this is fine. On this one, House Bill 503 is an agency bill that I think would be good to have support on. Senate Bill 119 potentially loses $800,000 a year and offers a vessel for our license framework to be meddled with and would have potentially negative impacts. So those are the 2 bills that I would say on here may be potential for action. On this one, the exemption of a parish in House Bill 465 from a statewide program is a bad policy. House Bill 570, the money for feral hogtails potentially would cost us $2 million a year and has not shown historically to be a good way to manage or eradicate feral hogs. So my recommendation there would be to recognize the negative impacts. I think it's probably too premature to weigh in on any carbon capture or sequestration bills at the moment. But certainly we're going to monitor those as we are a landowner who has effects. None of these bills have a real impact on the agency necessarily, but the tax credit for oyster shell recycling in House Bill 255 could potentially help us generate more cults to return to the water for oysters. And then the public oyster seed ground gear license bill, House Bill 438, was an oyster task force initiative. So those would be 2 good bills to support.
Cole,
Yes,
go
sir.
back to the fisheries bills. The shrimp and crawfish labeling bills, mislabeling. We should recognize that too as good bills.
That's another one that we will, have the ability to enforce. House Bill 528, that is. I'm not, if you're looking at one to support, I think that one gets more to the heart of the matter than House Bill 600.
Right. Me personally, if I'm eating in a restaurant and the restaurant is serving me, illegal seafood by mislabeling, and he sees an armed agent come through the door and wanting to see records, it's gonna get somebody's attention. So I think we need to. go
That's
ahead and push that.
528.
528, yes, sir.
Yeah, that's 528. Right there, and, that should be a good bill there to follow and try to get that. Then at the same time, from what I understand, they give our enforcements some overtime or whatever, where they can go into the, restaurant to, make their, case or whatever. And I think the seafood industry on both of them are prepared to put up some money to the department for the enforcement of that. That's all.
Make a motion. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a run at this, for bills that we, support and oppose. In support, House Bill 255, dealing with a credit for restaurants that recycle oyster shells. 297 that provides a time limitation for citing intentional and simple littering. House Bill 438 provides relative to oyster seed ground vessel permits. House Bill 503 provides relative to hull identification numbers issued by the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. House Bill 528 increases penalties for violations of shrimp and crawfish labeling requirements in food service establishments. And House Bill 221 repeals the 2 rules for every one promulgated. Or do you want to just monitor that one?
I would certainly not recommend supporting that one. I think that's an
Oh, I'm
arbitrary.
sorry, yeah, got it as an X. All right, and then those in opposite that we'd want to oppose, 453 requires that carbon dioxide injected. 465 that deals with Livingston Parish and the Louisiana Singing River systems. 570s that establish a monetary reward for feral hog tails. 119 that provides for the youth hunting license fee and licensing requirement. And 221 that repeals the 2 rules for every one promulgated. Are there any other ones that I missed? Does anyone else have some?
Anyone else? Kevin, you got your light.
Where's the
on.
221?
House Bill 221 was the, if you promulgate a rule, you have to remove 2.
Well, we probably want to add House Bill 600, Senator Kerner did that on the mislabeling of imports.
Yep, and that's fine. If you'd like to support it, just keep in mind, there's 2 instruments that deal with that. The one that Commissioner McPherson has recommended is the more robust of the 2. But, certainly we can support both, or you can support both.
Both of them. All right. Anybody else? President?
No, it's just if he made that in the
Make
form
a
of a motion.
motion,
we
okay,
need a
you gonna second
Yeah,
the motion that we go, okay. We got a motion by,
And I amend my motion.
To include 600, House Bill
600,
600, yes, sir.
amend the motion also. So we got the motion on the floor. I'm not gonna try to redo it, so I'm gonna ask for a vote. All in favor, state aye. Any opposition? No opposition. Ms. Susan, hopefully you caught all of that motion.
Thank you very much for your time. It's much appreciated. Happy Easter to everybody.
All right. Next, we have public wanting to address the commission. Going once, going twice, going 3 times, no public. We're gonna call for adjournment. Thank everyone. Happy Easter to all of y'all too.